کټ کیږي په دې هغه باندې چې ولې چې هغه کوم هغه سی و اړو کې سی و
Afghan soldier Lal Muhammad waited 3 days for an airlift after shooting himself in the foot. In the end, the foot had to be amputated. This is a big problem now for the Afghan army. With American support leaving, they lack the infrastructure to get the wounded off the battlefield. Post-Afghan correspondent Kevin Seif has been following this story, and he very generously takes a break from his R&R in Southeast Asia to talk to us about it. Good to see you, Kevin. Thanks again for finding some time on an evening out there during your vacation. This seems like a pretty big problem. They don't have the air support that the U.S. has, so how are they getting people where they need to go when they get injured?
For the last 10 years, like you said, they've relied almost entirely on American helicopters. So every time an Afghan soldier was wounded critically on the battlefield, it was as simple as just making a phone call to an American base or an American commander, and a U.S. Black Hawk would be there within minutes. And that's only recently begun to change. And now they know that if they make that phone call, that U.S. Black Hawk probably won't be there to pick them up. And so what the Afghans have to rely on, given the sort of weakness of their Air Force, is a fleet of unarmored ambulances. And those ambulances often have to make very, very dangerous journeys from the battlefield to military hospitals. Those journeys can be, more than 10 hours long, depending on where the fighting is taking place. And the roads between the battlefield and the hospital are often peppered with IEDs. And so in many cases, the ambulance drivers are simply unwilling to take those injured soldiers to the hospitals where they need to go. And so we're seeing soldiers like Lal Muhammad who are dying on the battlefield of wounds that are treatable, wounds that they would have survived months ago when U.S. helicopters were available to transport those Afghan soldiers.
And is this a temporary in-transition problem? Is there prospects that the Afghan solution will come online, or is this just, as far as the eye can see, going to be the situation?
Well, that's really the frightening thing from the Afghan perspective. This is a relatively new change. The Afghan ambulances are being used essentially for the first time in this war, and Afghans realize that in the near future, there's just no chance that they're going to have the sort of air support that they've known for the last decade. Their fleet is tiny, and aside from the size of the fleet, the air fleet, they're not well trained. So at this point, without American support, without Americans often flying along with them, they're unable to conduct air medevacs, and that doesn't look like it's going to change anytime in the near future. So, like the head of the Afghan army wrote to his commanders on the ground, if soldiers are wounded for the foreseeable future, the call needs to be send an ambulance from the battlefield to the hospital. And as soon as that message made its way across Afghanistan, Afghan commanders sort of just shrugged and said, a lot of guys are going to die, and that's what we're seeing already.
Is this a discrete problem, clearly a big problem, or is this kind of a sign of things to come and a sign of what we can expect from this transition?
Right. I mean, the transition, it's sort of become a buzzword in Afghanistan. And U.S. commanders, U.S. generals love to talk about sort of the idea of Afghans in the lead, the military transition having come sort of almost to its completion at this point. And that's true. I mean, there are Afghans doing the fighting in places where Americans were fighting only a few years ago. But there's certainly a dark side to transition, which is that the Afghans are doing the fighting with far fewer resources than the Americans had. And the unfortunate thing is that often those resources they disappear abruptly. They don't fade out gradually. And so one day, an Afghan commander is able to call on U.S. helicopters, and effectively the next day he's not. And that's a real blow to morale, and it changes not just the way that Afghan soldiers are treated, but it also changes the way that soldiers fight. Because if they know that there's not going to be a helicopter there to pick them up when they're wounded, a lot of them say, how can you expect me to fight in such dangerous places knowing that the risk is so high? And that's especially true in units that have seen soldiers wait for hours waiting for an ambulance. When they go back to the battlefield after their comrades are injured, they're demoralized. And this is just the beginning. So, we'll see what happens over the next few months and years as the Afghans really take on this war independently.
Okay, Kevin Seif taking a break from vacation on the Thai-Lao border to chat with us. Thanks for doing it. Enjoy the rest of your very well-earned rest.
Sure, thanks.